Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about the effects track in patterning. The effects in patterning all live in our effects track. So we have our 8 kind of sampler instrument tracks here, and then the last track is the effects track. So the effects track houses our send effects like delay and reverb, as well as EQ and distortion and compression. The reason it's on its own track is because with patterning 3, we can automate, modulate the settings and make the effects kind of move and be sequenced like the other tracks can. So we selected the effects track, and you'll notice that when you change from a sampler track to an effects track, we get different set of menus on the right. So we still have our pattern and our loop settings, but then we have our delay and reverb page, as well as our EQ, distortion, and compression page. We also will have layers where we can draw in automation for these parameters. Let's start with the delay and reverb settings. So the delay and the reverb are send effects. That means that we can send an individual sample over to these effects. The delay effect is an echo, super common type of audio effect. It will make a repeat of any sound going into it, so you get these audible rhythmic echoes. So to use the delay, I'm going to take a sound. So we have a snare sound here. And I'm just going to, in the mix window of that snare, we'll turn up our delay send. For more information about how this mix window works, how to get to it, and all the sampler settings, you can check out this video right here. Using this send, we can send the snare sound over to our echo or our delay. So now we should hear it. And you can hear that each time the snare hits, it goes through this rhythmic delay effect. So the main settings of a delay effect are going to be the delay time and the feedback, and then there's a couple other things that are worth playing around with. So the delay time can either be synced to the tempo of the track. So if it's in sync mode, we can set our delay time in musical time. So here's half notes. Now, kind of funny because my pattern is also half notes, so it's not a very good example. Let's set this to 16th notes. And this can go all the way from 30-second notes up to a whole note. But a whole note's going to be it's going to line up exactly with the pattern, so it's not going to be very interesting in our situation. We can also do like triplets, so a triplet quarter note. And so if we don't want the delay to be synchronized to time, we can put it in free mode, and now the delay is in milliseconds, and it goes from 20 milliseconds up to 1,000. So 20 is very short, and we get kind of like a smattering, kind of like, I don't know, I guess it sounds like you're in a metal tube or something. So that's kind of fun if you want it to be more of like a textural type of delay rather than a rhythmic one. Before I talk about this filter section, I want to talk about the delay feedback. So feedback in a delay is the number of repeats, but it's not in numbers. It's not in literal numbers of repeats. Feedback is the amount of the signal that you take and you put back into the delay. So it's literally just like a volume control after the echo that feeds the echo, the output of the echo back into the input. And so if you have a feedback of 0, you will just get 1 echo, just 1 repeat. And if you have a feedback of 100%, which we can't go to in here, if you have a feedback of 100%, you're saying every time you play an echo, put that signal exactly at the same volume back into itself, and it will echo forever. So the highest echo amount here is 99%. And it's going to ring out for quite a while. And I'll just turn the feedback down so it doesn't ring out for a while, so you don't have to wait for it to fade out. So the delay feedback is the essentially the number of repeats, how long the sound will feed back into itself. The filter section is a filter. It's a lot like the filter on our sampler instrument. We've got a low pass, band pass, and a high pass. And this is a filter that's inserted into the delay line. So it basically goes through the delay, through the filter, and then through the feedback path. So this, by using this filter, you're basically saying each subsequent echo will get filtered. So each subsequent repeat of the sound will have this filter sound imparted onto it. So this is really cool. Let me turn this filter into like a high pass. Let's hear what that sounds like. You can hear how each subsequent echo gets kind of like thinner and thinner. If I make this, let's do this low pass. Let me turn this down a little bit. You can hear that each echo is getting darker and darker. So this kind of putting a low pass filter in is one part of how you can make this sound sort of like a tape echo. That's sort of like a feature of a tape echo kind of sound, is that each echo gets sort of degraded, and in this case using a filter. So that's a really cool way to just kind of, not only to add like a kind of character to your echo, but it also can help you with the mix. So if you want to have the kind of trails, but you don't necessarily want it to eat up so much space in the mix of your sound, you can use the filter to kind of focus the delay sound in the mix. An interesting thing that's been added in patterning 3 that we didn't have before is this stereo spread. So essentially, when it's off, when it's in the middle, the left and right echoes are exactly in sync with each other, so they sound the same. It's one echo. But if you go off to the side, you're basically offsetting a left and right delay time, and so the delays will be out of sync with each other, and depending on how you have everything else set up, that can either just kind of smear the sound or widen the sound or get super crazy. Let's hear what this sounds like. Yeah, I don't know how well the stereo is going to come through on YouTube or Instagram, but in my headphones, I can really hear it going right and left. You'll notice that when I change the settings, either the delay time or the stereo spread while it's playing, you actually hear the delay. You hear like weird pitch artifacts, and that's by design. When you change the delay time, it's gonna slew that value, like slide to the new value. And when you do that with the delay time, you end up with these kind of pitch shifting artifacts, which I'm just a fan of, so I left it in there. Then the last setting here in our delay is our delay to reverb, and this is just a mix setting. Do we want the output of the delay to then go through our reverb channel? And this is actually a wet dry. So here we just get the delay by itself, and then over here, the delay is entirely sent to the reverb. So we're not hearing the echoes by themselves, we're just hearing the echo sent through the reverb. One thing that's really fun to do with this is to modulate. One thing I like to play with is modulating our delay time. So if I say put LFO1 on to our delay time, it's gonna apply an LFO to our delay, and those pitch artifacts that I was just talking about are just going to be kind of constantly happening. Okay, it's a little extreme, but it's a fun idea and something worth exploring. It's weird. The next page in our effects is our reverb, and like the delay, the reverb is a send effect. So if I want to send any of our sounds over to the reverb, I'm just going to go to that sound so we can continue to work with our snare. And instead of sending to the delay, we'll send to our reverb. The reverb settings, typically reverb algorithms are a little bit more opaque. It's not as simple as delay time and feedback. Usually an algorithm that's generating reverb digitally is kind of a collection of comb filters and all-pass filters in kind of a network to create this kind of smeared room, sound that makes it sound like the sound is in a room. With the reverb, we have room size and damping. So room size is just like you can think of it as like modeling the size of the artificial room that we're in. And then damping is going to be kind of how much do the walls suck up the sound and make it ring out or not. So if I make the room sound bigger, the sound kind of rings out more in a certain way. And then damping, with damping up, you can hear that it's there's much less high frequencies. The sound is sort of being captured by these artificial walls more, and we just hear the kind of lower frequencies. And it's much brighter with the damping down. There's also a filter associated with this. This is a high shelf filter. So we set the cutoff frequency and the filter gain. So it's going to be this filter is the filter frequency is going to set the frequency of our high shelf, and then the gain will either amplify those high frequencies or attenuate those high frequencies. So we can basically make our reverb brighter by amplifying the filter or darker by attenuating the filter. All of these parameters can be automated and modulated, like I just demonstrated with the delay. I should also point out that we can also modulate the send to this. So let's say that I want, this first drum hit to not go through the reverb and the second one to go through the reverb. I can hold down my reverb send and I can draw in just a send for that one step. And it's just a nice way of getting some, some variation. In our mixer view, we do have the delay and reverb faders. So if you wanted to set those amounts in the mixer view, you can do that as well there. Those are our send effects. The next page of our effects track are where the EQ, distortion, and compression lives. And these are, instead of being send effects that we send individual sounds to, these are on the master bus. So that means that everything coming out of the main outputs is going through these three effects: EQ, distortion, and compression. So to hear this better, let me get some kind of beat going, and so we can hear it on a full beat. We got a beat going. Let's go to our effects track and we'll look at our EQ, our distortion, and our compression. So again, this EQ is going to affect everything in the mix. Everything's going through it, including the delay and the reverb. So it's on the master bus. So it's a 3-band EQ. We've got a high shelf, a mid, like parametric EQ, and a low shelf. Our high shelf, we can set the frequency and the gain of the high shelf. So it can be amplified by up to 15 dB, which is a lot, or attenuated by 15 dB. And then we can move the frequency around. By the way, you can double tap on these to reset them. So especially with the gain, it's nice if you want to turn that band off, you can just double tap and it'll go back to 0 dB, which is unity gain, meaning no change in gain. So that's our high shelf. We have a mid band. that has gain, frequency. So also it can go plus or minus 15 dB. And the midband has something interesting, which you can already see here, which is there's a stereo component to the midband. You can see on the graph there's kind of two little mountain peaks there. There's a mid EQ stereo section, which basically just takes the left and right of this midband and splits them up so they can go right and left. And this is just a nice way of kind of adding kind of a subtle stereo field to our overall mix. This is a fun one to modulate. So to apply an LFO to this is really fun. So Alt, LFO, and then we'll put it on EQ spread. And turn that down just a little bit. Oh, I have this way down here. That's why it's looking funny. There we go. So a nice way to just add a little bit of variation in the stereo field. And then we have our low shelf. We have our low shelf gain, plus or minus 15 dB, and then the frequency of that. Okay. So pretty straightforward EQ. I think the only thing maybe that's a little bit unique or worth pointing out in terms of how this EQ might be different than something you might already be used to is this stereo effect, the stereo spread of the midband. Great, I'm gonna just clear that so it doesn't get in the way of looking at the other sections. Oh, this is just one thing I'll probably mention a bunch. If you do have something assigned, like you can see our LFO is assigned there, I can just hit the eraser tool and that'll allow me to clear all of the automation and modulation. So if you ever come across a parameter and you're like, why is it moving? I want it to stop moving. That's probably the quickest way to do it if you're not sure how it got there. Let's move on. The EQ section. All right, so the next page is our distortion. The distortion on this master channel is very similar to the distortion that you'll learn about in the sample parameters video. That's right here, but I'll explain it for you here as well. This distortion effect is on the master bus, so it's gonna affect all the sounds coming through it, all the tracks, plus the send effects and whatnot. We've got a wet and dry mix, so that's mixing between our non-distorted mix and our distorted mix. And you'll hear that with this setting, it's actually quite a bit quieter because the settings of these of the distortion can be quite extreme. So first of all, let me set this to a sort of more basic place so that we can see it, hear it. Great. So this is a saturation wave shaper distortion. It's got a saturating curve, and we can control the shape of this using the shape control. You can just think of this as the higher the shape, the more distortion it's adding, the more overtones it's adding to the signal. The asymmetry is going to add the even harmonics. So the shape, if you have a symmetrical wave shaper, you get odd harmonics. If you add asymmetry, you get even harmonics as well. So that'll add different harmonics to your sound. Let's listen to what that sounds like. Okay, so in addition to this saturator, we have a filter which goes before the distortion. So we can basically set which frequencies of our mix we want to go through the distortion. We have frequency of the filter and then the resonance. And the way I like to use this, because obviously if we have a really resonant kind of narrow band for this filter, we're not letting a whole lot through, and so we end up with a much quieter sound. But what I like to do is kind of find a cool frequency where something cool is happening. And then I'll mix that with the dry signal. So here's our dry, there's our wet, and then I'll find a place in between where I'm getting kind of the best of both worlds. Maybe we want to just distort low frequencies. It's kind of cool. Great, so that's the distortion effect on the main. Both the EQ and distortion can be fully automated and modulated. The last effect here, the compressor, is a little bit different just in the sense that you can't modulate it, but I couldn't think of a really great like musical use for that. So the compressor is master bus compressor. And there are many strong opinions and videos about compression on the internet, but I will just briefly explain how a compressor works. The basic idea of the compressor is that it's going to kind of gel together our mix and make everything kind of stick together a little bit nicer. So compressor is a dynamics effect, so it works on the amplitude of our signal. When I'm playing, you can see the overall amplitude of my beat coming through the compressor. The way a compressor works is that it has a threshold, which is this white line here, and any sound that goes above that threshold will be compressed. That means the dynamics, the volume of that sound above that threshold will be lessened. It'll make that part quieter. It'll have less of a dynamic range. So the threshold sets where that happens, and then the amount of compression is called the ratio. And so we have some fixed amounts, 2, 4, 10, and 20. 2 is a really gentle compression, 4 is a little bit less gentle, and 20 is getting into sort of, that's where people start calling it a limiter. So what does this ratio means? A 4-to-1 ratio means that for every 4 dB of input over the threshold, so if here's the threshold and my sound is 4 dB louder than that, the output of that will only be 1 dB louder. So we've now reduced that output signal by a ratio of 4-to-1. We've squashed it. And so this has the effect of kind of gelling everything together. Our peaks are a little bit quieter, and that means that we can make everything a little bit louder. So the quiet parts can be louder and the loud parts get quieter. So we're squashing or compressing that dynamic range. So you see I have my threshold set here. So the white line is my threshold, and then the blue line at the top is showing us the amount of compression, how much the compressor is working. And you can see here that every time something goes over the compressor, that amount of gain reduction kicks on. You can see here in the bottom left of that window how much gain reduction is happening. Right now we have 5.5 dB of gain reduction. So that's telling us how much compression is actually happening. And the reason that's really useful is because we have this thing called makeup gain. The makeup gain is how much we then boost the overall level of the compressor to make up for that lost dynamic. So by putting the makeup gain at 5, we're essentially gain matching the non-compressed signal with the compressed signal. So if I turn the ratio off, we're turning off the compressor, and we can hear what it sounded like without the compressor and without that gain matching. And you can hear the overall, there's more kind of body to the sound. It's overall, it appears louder even though the peaks are actually at about the same place. So that's why that makeup gain is there. The other two controls that you often see on a compressor are attack and release. The attack is the amount of time it takes for a compressor to turn on after it goes above the threshold. So the sound goes above the threshold, and it will take a certain amount of time for that compression to start. With really short attack times, the compressor just like goes immediately on, and it immediately will compress the sound. And that can be good with certain kinds of sounds, but with other kinds of sounds, specifically drum sounds, like you might be working with if you're working with this specific compressor, you actually want, the beginning of a sound often has a transient or a sharp peak on it. And you actually want to let those transients through because you want the sound to remain their kind of snappiness. So with drums, you often will set your attack time a little bit slower so that the transient of the sound can get through it will trigger the compressor to start working, but only after a certain amount of time. So the transients can get through, and then the compressor kicks on kind of after the transient happens. If you have a really short attack time with a drum sound, you can end up kind of killing the drum sound and making it just kind of sound smeary and not nice. So I like to set the attack time a little bit slower. And release time is similarly how long it takes the compressor to stop working, to turn itself off after it goes below the threshold. Release, I think, is one of the harder things to hear. And I think even after, many years of working in electronics and music and stuff, it's something that I still don't feel that I have like a great ear for. But one of the things that you can aim for with the release is, if you're looking at the graph, kind of trying to get the release so that it bounces back just sort of in rhythm of the song. You can think about the release kind of setting how it pumps in relationship to the rhythm of the song. So you might look for a release time where the compressor is turning off just before it is getting triggered again by another beat. So you can think of release as kind of controlling this feeling of pumping or the rhythm of the compressor. The mix is a mix between the uncompressed signal and the compressed signal. So normally a compressor is 100% wet. You're just hearing the sound through the compression. And that's called serial compression. That's meaning you have your sound and it goes in series through the compressor and it's just one signal path. If you set the mix somewhere in the middle, you're getting what's called parallel compression, where you have your dry signal and your wet signal parallel to one another. So you're mixing in the dry signal with the wet signal. And this is great with drums because you can do something like use a much more aggressive kind of compression sound to get some of the body that you want out of it, and then mix it in with the dry sound to keep kind of some of the transients active. Google how to compress drums and you'll find lots of opinions about it. And good opinions and bad ones. Good ones and bad ones. That's our compressor effect. I did mention at the beginning of this video that the effects track has a sequencer associated with it, and that does allow us to automate and modulate all the settings of our effects. So one way that you might do this, so we have our beat going. Here's kind of an interesting idea. Let's say that we have our snare. Oh, I don't have a snare on this one. Let's go, what sound do we have here? This one. Yeah, this sound. Okay. So this sound, let's send this sound over to our delay. So we're sending it to our delay, and I'll just solo this track for now. But on our effects track, we can modulate the delay on our sequence. Let's say that I want to make it so that the delay time changes every once a measure or something. So I'm going to go to my loop settings, and there's a video about all these loop settings. The loop settings are the same for the effects tracks as for the sampler tracks. And so there's a video called Loop Settings in Patterning 3 that will explain what all these are. But let me set this FX track to have a step duration of something really long, like a whole note. So that means that now when I'm looking at this, my FX track is gonna go once a measure, because we're essentially in 4/4. So you can see it's just stepping through those every 4 quarter notes. And so what I can do now is go back to my delay. I'll hold down the delay time. And now I could say, okay, I actually want to have a different delay time on each of these, every whole note. I'm going to change the delay time. And so we'll be hearing a different delay effect a different amount of time for each time around. And you get to hear all these weird artifacts that happen because of that. You can see on the delay time how it's automating that parameter. Yeah, I didn't know what to expect. I actually really like this. Yeah, we get some really cool things. there. So that's like one example of how we might do this. Similarly, we could, modulate other things like delay feedback would be a fun one to go along with this, or EQ settings. Let me just say one more thing about the effects track, which is that something that I think could potentially be confusing is when you are just drawing in on the main like velocity layer of the effects track, there isn't like an equivalent velocity for the effects because there's no drum trigger to happen. The velocity on the effects track is used as a macro for controlling things. So if you hold down the Alt key and you get to your velocity layer, and again, this is something in the modulation video, this velocity is, what I'm drawing on this main layer, and that can be set up to control any parameter. So let me, just to make this sort of easier to look at, let me change this a little bit. Let me set my step duration back to something reasonable, like a quarter note. And so I have these velocities going by a quarter note. I'll go to my EQ and we'll go to our velocity layer and I'll just kind of apply this to different things. And that velocity now is controlling multiple parameters at once. So the velocity is just used to control multiple parameters as like a macro. You can think of it as like one knob turning many knobs at once. So you can kind of see how this FX layer is adding a bunch of kind of like ear candy and just also can be used for kind of more subtle mixing type stuff. Okay, thank you for watching. Happy patterning.